Hey, good evening, everyone. Welcome to Writers Read, a long-standing series here at EMU where we invite writers, mainly poets and fiction writers, to share their work with EMU in the larger city of Harrisonburg in Rockingham County. Thank you for coming out tonight to take in and celebrate Rebecca Kauffman's latest novel, The Restoration. The Reservation. I don't know why I called it The Restoration. Now I'm trying to explain why I said The Restoration. I have no idea, but it's like this is the moment when Charles II sort of comes to power in England in 1660. It has nothing to do at all, as far as with Rebecca's novel. Okay, here's the plan for the evening. I'll say a few words of introduction, better than the one so far, hopefully. Rebecca will take the stage to share a few things about her novel, mainly just to read from it. And then we'll open the floor around 7:30 for questions from you all to just have a conversation with Rebecca about the book. We'll do that until about 8 o'clock, after which you can buy a book, thanks to Parentheses, our great local bookstore. Books are being sold in the back by Jackie. And then Rebecca will stick around till about 8:30 or so to sign books. The event is being live streamed on YouTube, so for those of you who are watching there, welcome. And I'll just say a little bit about the novel. Rebecca Kauffman's sixth novel, The Reservation, tells the story of one day in the life of a fancy Italianish restaurant in a middling, unnamed university town, a lot like Harrisonburg. In the morning, 22 steaks are discovered missing. In the evening, John Grisham and a small entourage have made reservations. And in between that, as readers, were treated to a menu of chapters, each focused on different workers in the restaurant. One of my favorite scenes happens near the end, and I think I can describe it without giving too much away, but Glenn, who's a great character in the novel, is tasked with preparing this creme brulee for an important guest who's at the bar. And the guest asks, sort of because there's been some bad reviews of the creme brulee online, "Your late night cook has a light touch with a torch?" ? And the bartender assures him that he does have a light touch with a torch. And that phrase, for whatever reason, stood out to me as a really good description of Rebecca's writing. She has a light touch with the torch. And I think that torch is like the way that she sort of puts heat on some of her characters, like to describe them without illusion. But there's also something about that brings out their sweetness in a way that's like better than just sugar that hasn't been torched. So anyways, it's a really moving moment in the novel. It has nothing to do explicitly with like how she is a writer, but this is just me using my English professor prerogative to say that's why I think it's a really great description of what she's doing in her book. I just realized, I don't think I introduced myself at all. Did I say who I was? My name is Kevin Seidel. I'm a professor of literature and English here at EMU. And now I'll go back to what I wanted to say about Rebecca's book. The Reservation is a 2026 most anticipated book of the year from People Magazine, Atlanta Journal-Constitution, Southern Living, and UK Vogue. It received a starred review in Publishers Weekly, which called The Reservation, quote, "a pitch-perfect mashup of Clue and The Bear," and, quote, "a profound meditation on what it means to be connected." Rebecca is also the author of Another Place You've Never Been, The Gunners, The House on Fripp Island, Chorus, and I'll Come to You. Rebecca now lives, she's originally from rural northeastern Ohio. She received her MFA in creative writing from New York University. She lives now in Harrisonburg, Virginia, as many of you know, and she has been for a number of years writer in residence at EMU and has taught college writing, academic writing, and fiction courses here at EMU as well. Okay, without any further ado, let's welcome Rebecca to the stage.
Thank you so much, Kevin. Thank you all for being here. I have my sister to thank for all of the brulee knowledge that made its way into the book. And thank you also to Kevin and the students who joined us for dinner beforehand. That was really nice. I don't think I have much to say about the book before I dive right in. So I'm just going to do that. I'm going to read a few pages from the opening chapter 1 of the book, and then I'm going to skip ahead and read a few pages from the beginning of chapter 2 to introduce you to Aunt Orsa, the owner of this restaurant. And then I'm going to skip ahead a ways and read a standalone chapter that occurs later in the book, but I believe it's spoiler-free. And yeah, I guess if Kevin didn't mention this, which you may have, but the book alternates perspectives between staff members. So chapters are divided and titled according to job title. And so you make your way through the various staff members with a few exceptions to that from the beginning of day to the end. So the book starts with the operations assistant. The late October air was blue and cold. Frost glittered on the paved lot of the apartment complex. Danny deadbolted the door behind him, crossed the lot, made a left, and walked along the shoulder of the quiet street until he reached the Dollar General, where the sidewalk began. He breathed into his cold fists, then stuffed them into the pockets of his fleece. His knuckles met crumbs. He passed the poultry plant. It was already spewing smoke and filling the air with a strong, meaty smell. He approached the railroad tracks, where a grimy pink Popples toy lay face down directly on the rail. He towed it out of harm's way. The sky was still starry overhead, but pale to the east. Danny's key worked only on the basement door, not the front entrance of the restaurant that faced the street and displayed the name, Aunt Orsa's, in fat, looping cursive. The main door would remain locked until either Chef Oz or Ray, the manager, arrived. Danny entered, clocked in, and turned on the lights. The restaurant smell lived on his clothing, but was still briefly overpowering upon each arrival. He dropped his fleece in his locker and retrieved his clipboard, then went upstairs to the kitchen to start coffee. There was a note from Orsa on the dry erase board next to the schedule relating to tonight's service. It's Grisham Day, people. No staring, no small talk. Carpe diem, Aunt O. Orsa wanted the staff to address her as Aunt O. I'm everyone's favorite crazy aunt, she insisted. Even though Danny was her only actual blood relation at the restaurant, and of his two aunts, she was not his favorite. She was crazy, though. Danny had come here to work for her 6 months before. Orsa had created the role of operations assistant specifically for him. There was never consideration toward putting him on the line or behind the bar. Instead, Danny's job was essentially to look over shoulders, double-check that closing duties had not been fudged, cross-reference sales reports with inventory, general housekeeping oversight in common areas such as staff restroom and lockers. Danny reported infractions and Orsa addressed them. Danny liked the nature of the work, which made use of his eye for detail and allowed him to move at his own pace. He liked arriving early and rarely overlapping with more than the same few people unless he really milked the clock into the afternoon. He did not like being a tattletale, but figured coming on as the owner's nephew with no prior restaurant experience, he never really stood a chance at making friends anyway. Tuesdays were Danny's busiest shift of the week since the restaurant was closed on Sundays and Mondays, and Saturday nights were always slammed. It was the only fine dining establishment in their small town, which was home to a large university. Fall was the most hectic season between move-in weekend, parents' weekend, homecoming weekend, and football. Tuesday dinner service was usually relaxed compared to the weekend, but there was pressure today to have things primed for perfection because it was Grisham Day. It was only a 10-top, but Orsa would go berserk if anything went wrong at the famous author's table. Danny waited for the coffee machine to sputter to completion, then poured himself a cup. He started his rounds. First, he checked that all the essential machinery was functioning. Ice machine, range, coolers, freezers at the proper temps. He slipped on a smear of oil next to the walk-in and wiped it up. Then he made his way through the restaurant, inspecting Saturday's closing side work. He wrote up that oil spill and a rack of unpolished wine glasses. He wrote up a toilet that was uncleaned and unflushed and propped the restroom door open with the rubber stopper to dispel the stink. Near the staff lockers in the basement, he discovered an unwrapped Twix bar on the ground. Food left out in the open like this over the weekend was among the worst infractions. Orsa had lamented to Danny on his first day about past rodent infestations. Somehow we've still never gotten caught, she added. By a health inspector? Or a guest. We've been close. A lady pointed across the dining room one night, told Ray it looked like a dead mouse. Ray had the presence of mind to walk right over, pick up the thing with her bare hand, and carry it off without batting an eye. She reported back to that lady it was just a mitten. Danny tossed the Twix bar into the trash, added it to his report, and started inventory next. He worked his way through the bar and the kitchen and ended with the walk-in cooler. He checked the dates on the cartons of cream. He checked for mold on the wheels of cheese and bunches of beets with veiny, wilted greens. He checked for torn cellophane or discolored spots on the pork chops. Because Chef Oz made orders and accepted deliveries throughout the week, it was rare that any product was completely gone. So Danny was surprised to see that the shelf space designated for ribeyes was nearly empty. There were only 2 remaining, red and gleaming in their vacuum-sealed individual packs. Served with spinach and polenta, the 16-ounce ribeye was the most expensive item on the menu. Danny had never seen fewer than a dozen of them in the walk-in cooler at any given time, and usually it was many more. He wondered if Saturday night could have possibly been busy enough to clean them out. He stepped out of the cooler to warm up while he looked back and forth between sales reports and the inventory he'd taken earlier in the week. He did math in his head, then with a calculator just to make sure, and got the same result. Where there should have been 24 ribeyes, there were instead 2. All right, so I'm going to skip ahead to the next chapter to introduce you to Aunt Orsa. So Danny calls her after making this discovery and reports the theft, and her chapter takes up there. The owner. Orsa was on the recumbent bike when Danny called about the steaks. After hanging up, she mulled over whether to shower and rush in there or finish her workout first. A quick response and presence in the restaurant following this sort of thing was important for asserting authority. But she was enjoying herself. After a night of rain, the sun was sublime, the sky cloudless with the intensity of blue that you never got on a warm day. The bike was located in the guest bedroom on the 2nd floor of their house, and she had it faced out the large cathedral window toward the street so she could watch the neighborhood goings-on while cycling furiously. She had always been an amazing biker, ever since training wheels. Occasionally when the light was right, like this morning, walkers would catch a glimpse of her up there through the window, but they usually didn't wave back. She toweled off her face and hollered for Larry in the direction of the staircase a few times until he appeared in the doorway of the room, damp and bent at the waist. The steps were hard for him, but good for him. If it wasn't for Orsa, he'd probably never leave the couch. "Guess what?" she said. "We've got a thief on our hands, on Grisham Day, of all the days." Larry took a seat on the edge of the guest bed and pulled absently at a gold tassel on the bed runner. "Petty cash?" he said. "Booze?" "Ribeyes. 22 of them." She pointed at the tassel. "Leave that thing alone. You'll make it fray." "So what do you buy them at?" "Little under 10 apiece. So we're looking at a loss of 200 wholesale. Triple that if we're talking profit." "What does a person do with 22 steaks? That's a hell of a feast." "I can imagine a black market." Larry screwed up his red face. "For meat? It couldn't possibly worth the trouble for the $100 you might make offloading them. Although, I guess $100 is a lot, depending who you're dealing with. A car payment, a bunch of drugs, dope, smack." Orsa cracked up at the way he said smack. Larry was retired now, but had enjoyed an illustrious career as a personal injury lawyer, the only one in town, so he'd had some experience working with the sort of people who worked for Orsa, though he'd never learned to talk about them in a way that wasn't categorically ridiculous. Because of his work, Larry had been helpful when Orsa first opened the restaurant 10 years ago, educating her on all the ways to safeguard against employee claims. He pointed out that as a female business owner, she was especially vulnerable to grifters looking for a quick buck. But aside from the occasional legal guidance, Larry was pretty hands-off with the restaurant, which Orsa appreciated. He had no input on menu or service or anything like that. He had the palate of a dog, she always said, meats and treats. "Is Danny the one who called?" Larry asked. She nodded. "What are the odds somebody misplaced them and he just hasn't looked hard enough? Or he bungled the numbers?" "Wouldn't be like him," she said. "There are 2 left anyway, on the shelf where there should be 24. "Interesting. That seems more like it might be a statement then, leaving 2. Any theories?" "Haters, you mean?" she said. "Half the people in there. The question is just which of them has the biggest balls and the thickest skull." "With Grisham coming in tonight, maybe you need me." No, I told you, Lair, I don't want you around. No lurking, no autographs, don't even think about it. You can come for a quick glimpse at a safe distance, that's all. The most exciting people to set foot in the restaurant to date were a food blogger with 6,000 Facebook followers and a Nickelodeon child star now in his 20s who Orsa had never heard of. Oh, and the local weatherman who always asked for ice in his red wine. While it was exciting to see a TV personality in the flesh, he came so often that by now it ceased to cause a stir. Larry scowled. "I was simply going to offer to do the steak pickup so that you can be a presence at the restaurant all day, with Grisham coming and all." "Oh, well, that'd be great," Orsa said, wiping her face. "And plan on doing another once-over of the restaurant when you come for the drop-off. Sniff around all the corners." Larry picked his nose. "Do you still just have the one surveillance camera?" Orsa nodded. "In the bar. It captures the register, but it won't be any help on this." "I keep telling you to install more of those," Larry pointed out. "And I keep telling you I got in a fight with the guy who installed it, and I'll be damned if I give that company any more of my money." Orsa eased herself off the bike and did a deep stretch. When she stood up, Larry was fiddling with the gold tassel again, so she swatted his hand like it was a bug. I'm going to leave off with that chapter there. So I am skipping ahead to about midway through. This chapter is titled The Diners. So this is one of the exceptions to the job titles of most of the other chapters. And there are no spoilers in here because the diners are completely oblivious to the theft and the drama surrounding the theft that is sort of spiraling around them. In the same way that the restaurant staff is completely oblivious to the private dramas and struggles of the diners. And these characters are unnamed. They're titled according to their seat numbers, which is how the restaurant staff would identify them. Table 14, seat number 1, let his wife do the talking at the host stand. It wasn't like she had any more experience with this kind of thing, fine dining, than he did, but she was more outgoing of the two, and she was the one that had called for the reservation, though she put it under his name. They were seated at a table located next to a window that faced directly into a ratty winterberry shrub, and beyond that, out across the parking lot. Seat 2 ran her hand over the white tablecloth and gazed through the dining room, then at the square brass votive in the center of the table. She had put her short hair in curlers for the first time in many years, and the small gray coils glowed around her face. Seat 1 was thirsty but afraid to lift his water glass, which was goblet-shaped and so full that the slightest tremor would result in a spill. Seat 2 said, "Gail told me that the one time they came here, she ordered a drink that had cayenne pepper floating in it." Seat 1 said, "You want something like that?" Seat 2 shook her head. "I thought I'd do a glass of wine. I was just saying." "Well, I wasn't saying you shouldn't." Seat 1 pulled his reading glasses from his breast pocket and put them on, then took them off. "I'm just going to do the soup of the day as long as it's nothing weird and a steak, like I saw on a website." Seat 2 said, "You don't even want to think about something else or hear the specials?" Seat 1 said, "I know what I like, but you do whatever you want, dear. I'm not trying to be a grump." He shifted in his seat and stared at the artwork hanging nearest to their table, an abstract work of a horse-like form emerging from red and gold splatter. "It's hard for me to relax, a place like this. Did you see the vehicles parked in the lot?" "Nope," Seat 2 said cheerfully. She hummed and tipped her head back and forth as she examined the menu. She had read it in advance on the website too, so Seat 1 didn't know what she was looking for. Their server introduced herself as Kenzie. Blonde with perfect teeth and dimples, she was uncannily pretty. Seat 1 thought girls who looked like this belonged only to TV. Kenzie took their drink order and asked if they had any questions about the menu. Seat 2 said, "Kenzie, that's a beautiful name. It suits you." Seat 1 said, "What's the soup?" Seat 2 said, "And I'd love to hear your specials." Kenzie opened her little black bifold book and read, "Soup of the day is a butternut squash. The only special is an appetizer, stuffed portobello mushroom with sausage, peppers, and Gruyere." Seat 1 knew that Seat 2 wouldn't touch a mushroom, but he watched as she licked her lips and said, "Sounds yummy." When Kenzie brought their beer and wine, they both made their order, 2 soups and 2 steaks, both medium well. Once Kenzie had left the table, Seat 1 took a few big swallows of beer and felt better. He forgot how numb his toes had gone in the narrow dress shoes Seat 2 had encouraged him to wear. He reached across the table for his wife's fingers and squeezed them. She said, "Are you enjoying yourself?" "I'm trying." "Good," she said. "That's the point, remember?" She let go of his hands and took a sip of her wine. "Remember?" "I remember." She lifted her napkin to her lips and dabbed them, then returned the napkin to her lap. "I really think this time it's going to stick. I have such a good feeling about it." "Okay," said Seat 1. "We went to a place sort of like this that one time with my brother in New Jersey. Do you remember that?" "I remember." "I think we both had the chicken, didn't we? And lots of bread. But mostly what I remember is how good the piano player was, that Italian man. What about you?" Seat 1 said, "Mostly I remember how good you thought that Italian piano player was." Seat 2 laughed, silly. Seat 1 burned his tongue on the soup. Once it cooled down, he could appreciate the flavor, but it didn't strike him as anything special, and the color was like throw up. Seat 2 claimed it was the best soup she'd ever had. Seat 1 said, "I like your chili better." "You're a crazy man," she said. "He insisted you could make this." "Maybe, but I don't guess I'm allowed to ask for a recipe in a place like this." Seat 1 said, "I bet if we look on the computer, we can find some recipes that'll taste like it, or close. You can find anything you want on the computer." They watched as a couple was seated nearby, the woman very round with pregnancy. The man helped with her chair and kissed the crown of her head. When Kenzie returned for their soup bowls, Seat 2 said to her, "Did you get to taste it before your shift? It's incredible." She added conspiratorially, "You should sneak a bite if you haven't already." Kenzie said, "I don't really like soup, like in general." Seat 1 and Seat 2 both ordered a second drink. After delivering them, Kenzie disappeared for a long spell while they awaited their steaks. They talked about the new neighbor who shaved one whole side of her head clean down to the skin and wore the other half in a long blue braid. Seat 2 said, "She really does such a nice job with her nasturtiums, though. I'd trust her with our watering if we ever leave town long enough to need it." She sipped her wine. "She reminds me of that Sarah girl that Jimmy brought around for a while. Do you remember her?" Seat 1 said, "Haven't thought about that one in ages." "I wonder if he'll start dating again soon now that—" "Who knows?" said Seat 1. They talked about the incumbent mayor's new campaign ad, which featured some footage of his terrier running through the park with the mayor's wife doing voiceover. They liked the guy, but agreed that the ad was off-putting. They talked about how their 40th anniversary was next summer already, and agreed that they ought to figure out some way to celebrate. Seat 1 was glad Seat 2 didn't suggest a repeat meal at this place, though that didn't mean it wouldn't come up at some point down the road. They talked about the great horned owl they heard high up in the ash tree to the west of their house every single night around 8 o'clock. Seat 2 had read recently that a great horned owl could live to be 50 years old. They talked about the current challenges of the food pantry operation, which Seat 2 oversaw at church. Still, their food had not arrived. Seat 2 said hopefully, "Well, we did order medium well." "True. And I bet they're really thick cuts. 16 ounces. Golly." She leaned back and rubbed her belly. They waited and waited and waited. Kenzie and several other waitstaff rushed through the dining room looking harried, although only half of the available tables in this section of the dining room were even seated. Seat 1 noticed some other guests looking around too, waiting and waiting and wondering. When the busboy stopped by with water, Seat 2 said pleasantly, "Busy night?" The busboy was sweating. 20 top on the patio, he said, and their entrees just came up. I'm sure you'll be next. Seat 2 assured him that she wasn't worried. "We're enjoying ourselves so much." She added, "It's our first time." The busboy said, "Celebrating something?" Seat 2 said, "Well, yes. at the exact same moment that seat 1 said, "Not really." They looked at one another and laughed. The busboy removed their empty glasses and said, "Would you like another round? I can let Kenzie know if I catch her before you do." Seat 2 said, "Should we?" "If you like." "I do. I'll have one too then." Seat 1 looked around once again and observed that they were the oldest people in this place by quite a ways. They were also dressed the most formally, Seat 2 in her blue dress and blazer and that huge necklace, Seat 1 in a tie. Plenty of other guests wore jeans, some even t-shirts. The busboy returned shortly with their entree plates, one in each hand, a white napkin draped over his left forearm. The steaks were fatty and incomprehensibly large. "My word," said Seat 2, staring at the thing. Kenzie showed up momentarily with their fresh drinks. "Sorry about the wait," she said. "A big table had their entrees come out right before yours, and there was an injury in the kitchen." "Oh dear," Seat 2 said. "Is everyone all right?" Kenzie said, "Who knows? Anything else I can get you right now?" Seat 1 and 2 clinked their glasses together after Kenzie left the table. Seat 2 said, "If we're toasting to anything, it ought to be Jimmy, right? For all of this." She swept her hand out over the table of food. Seat 1 grunted and sipped his beer. He knew he should be grateful. He knew he should be enjoying himself. He knew he should have hope, and for Seat 2's sake, he tried. They both picked around and ate a few ounces, but the sheer volume of meat on the plate was too much to really appreciate. Seat 2 poked with her knife. "The soup was just so rich. The steak is absolutely perfect, but I'm so full." Seat 1 thought his wife was so determined to have a perfect time, she wouldn't say a bad word about this meal if they had brought out a bowl of hair. When Kenzie returned to check in a while later, Seat 1 asked for to-go bags. He planned to give his meat to the dog. Seat 2 said, "It was incredible. We're just stuffed to the gills. I can't wait to finish this later at home." "So no dessert menus then?" Kenzie asked. Seat 2 said, "Maybe just to look." After Kenzie dropped dessert menus, Seat 2 said to Seat 1, "I think we ought to treat ourselves. Besides, I think we're only at 85 or so." Seat 1 hadn't been doing math, but he trusted hers. Seat 2 said, "Would you like to split a creme brulee with me?" "Whatever you want, honey," he said. He had zero interest in dessert, but was pleased that his wife was keen to spend the full gift card balance on this visit, meaning there would be no reason to return. "Goody," she said. And Seat 2 gobbled up the brulee when it came. She set her spoon down and said, "Now I'm truly about to burst." Seat 1 caught Kenzie's eye. He made the check motion with his hand. Before Kenzie had returned with it, Seat 2 pulled her purse from the shoulder of her chair and withdrew her pocketbook. The gift certificate was neatly folded. Seat 2 pressed it on the top of the table. Kenzie approached with a black bifold, which she rested on their table half open and said, "When you're ready." Seat 2 handed her the paper and announced, "We've got this." Kenzie gazed at the paper and gave it a funny look. She said, "They don't look like this." Seat 2 said, "Oh, what now?" Kenzie said, "Our gift cards are always a physical card, like a little card that we can actually run through our machine." Seat 2 said, "Oh, but, well, we did think this looked a little strange when we received it, but, everything's digital nowadays. We just sort of thought." Kenzie said neutrally, "I'll go ask my manager to make sure, but to me, I've never seen, this isn't right. But, well, anyhow, I'll show it to my manager just to make sure." She reached for the paper. A ferocious shame and familiar rage was rising inside of Seat 1. It was a sheet of normal computer paper with the restaurant's logo in black and white and the words, "Gift card for the value of $100, followed by a very long number. No expiration date, no barcode. Seat 1 had commented back upon receiving it, once it was just the two of them, of course, that it looked kind of strange and unprofessional. Seat 2 had pointed out, "But everything is done electronic like this nowadays. It's got their actual logo on it, see, right? And I'm sure this big, long, important number is the important part." Seat 1 had said, "I guess you're probably right." Confusion crumpling her face, Seat 2 was somehow still talking to Kenzie. "I just don't understand. See, we received this as a gift from..." Her voice trailed off. She said, "And he's had his problems, but we thought..." But Kenzie had already spun away from the table with the paper in hand. Seat 1 leaned over to one side to pull out his wallet and said flatly, "I guess we learned our lesson. Again." He counted 6 20s and put them on the table. "Here, let's just leave this cash and go. It's enough to cover the meal and the tip. There's no way Kenzie's coming back with good news, and I'd rather not have to talk about it again, or sit and wait while she runs a credit card. Seat 2 stared at him. You never carry that much cash, she said. Seat 1 exhaled. I just figured, better to be prepared for anything. Oh, you just figured, did you? Seat 2 drummed her fingertips on the top of her to-go box and gazed out the window for a moment, looking like she would cry. Sometimes she still needed to cry over things like this. Sometimes she didn't. Seat 1 said, I'm sorry. I love you. He had no idea what else to say. He was so full of love and pain that he could have thrown his old fist through the window. Seat 2 did not need to cry. Instead, she said, oh well then. She pulled the napkin from her lap onto the table and folded it neatly. She sighed. Let's go home. She looked at her watch. That owl's going to be coming out soon anyway. Seat 1 said, don't want to miss that. He followed his wife out of the dining room. He noticed that her hose had a little run at the left ankle. To Seat 1's relief, they did not pass either Kenzie or a manager on the way, but in the lobby, the hostess called out to them, how was everything tonight, folks? And Seat 2 lifted her head to say, we loved it. Everything was perfect. That's the end.
Thank you, Rebecca. So now the floor is yours. Questions? I'll come by with the mic, hand it to you. Oh, yeah, that was...
Last year at the Capitol Ale House for I'll Come to You, you spoke of the spark. And what was your spark for this book?
Oh, I'm so glad you asked. We were talking some about sparks at our dinner earlier. So as I've mentioned before, the spark usually arrives for me in the form of something that I witness in the real world that excites me in some way. For better and for worse, it can be something that incites anger or saddens me. It can be something that makes me cackle with glee or, throw my head back and howl with laughter, just something that stirs me up in some way. And these are usually very mundane occurrences that would mean very little probably to anyone else. And then when I go to the page, my hope is to recreate that spark, not by representing what I actually witnessed, but by dismantling what I saw and re-engineering it in order to recreate the feeling that it gave me, and to create something that is permanent out of something that was fleeting. So that's kind of how the spark turns into the story, and it's good for me to not enter into the writing with too many preconceptions about the length or form of a thing, whether the spark is going to be one paragraph or 20 pages or 200 pages, but to try and return to the spark and remember the feeling it gave me and find the truth there. So for this book, at the risk of boring you with a little bit of backstory, in between all of the novels that I've written previously, as soon as I finish a novel, I have this perverse inclination to write something that's way outside of my comfort zone, and usually ends terribly, is often in first person. We were talking about earlier, just some really ill-fated project. So I finished the book before this, and I did not want to waste all the time in writing a full novel manuscript, but I had this urge to write something bad and bizarre. So I somehow tricked myself into deciding that the project was going to be a collection of vignettes. It was not a novel, but it was just going to be a collection of first-person vignettes. And so I, barreled through this and wrote it in a couple weeks and enjoyed myself tremendously. And I sent this work to my agent and said, Michelle, I really enjoyed writing these. They're probably not publishable, well, what do you think? And she wrote me back and said, well, Rebecca, I really enjoyed reading these. They're probably not publishable. And I was like, perfect, say no more. So then I was able to put that to the side, and then with the idea of diving into something new. But as it happened, a couple of those vignettes were centered around my past in the restaurant industry, and were sort of born out of food service. And when I was looking over that failed project, those were the ones that had some energy to me. And so that sort of gave me the idea to set something in a restaurant. And then the Aunt Orsa character is very, very loosely based on a bar regular at a fine dining restaurant that I worked at as a college student in New York. She was deeply unpleasant. Nobody else wanted to go near her, and I was like, send her to me. What's she mad about today? I just loved her, and I loved serving her. She tipped horribly. Yeah, so she was a very distant version of the Aunt Orsa character who appears in this book. But as I said, I always have to completely divorce myself from any real person who is involved, and yeah, take that apart and make something new.
Just as long as they didn't burn your shit.
Right. Other questions?
Where do you write? Is there any place or situation that you favor for writing that enhances your capacity to write?
Well, I'm pretty set in my ways. I can say with zero confidence that this actually enhances my ability to write. But where I write is cross-legged on the couch in our living room in my pajamas, no matter what time of day it is. I'm almost always in my pajamas when I'm writing. And I often have the TV on at very low volume or muted. I wish I could say that I took advantage of the beautiful office that EMU has provided me as writer-in-residence. I very rarely make it in, and when I do, I usually have a 3-year-old and a 5-year-old boy in tow who have to be bribed with a visit to Aunt Rachie and all sorts of treats. So I have other places that I could and should be writing, but with this stage of life as full-time stay-at-home mom, it's usually at our couch. The other place I write is at my parents' home, sometimes in the afternoons while they're playing with the boys. I can hear them in other parts of the house, and I can put my feet up on the lazy boy and get some work done there. But yeah, it's certainly not the formal take yourself seriously setting that you might picture.
You didn't read this part, but there's a section about the busboy where it's like a stream of conscious moment. And I've worked in restaurants since I was 16, and it felt so real to me. And I guess I'm just wondering, when that came to you, how it came to you, or it's just sentence after sentence of if you haven't worked in a restaurant, it might not be as coherent as somebody who has. But I think that chapter was one of my absolute favorites.
Thanks, Katie. Yeah, so that is probably the closest to stream of consciousness writing that I've ever done. I think there are not quotation marks. It's not always clear whether the busboy is thinking aloud or if it's someone else's voice that's entering his. But that is how the rush feels. It's like utter chaos, and it can go on for hours, and you just run on sheer adrenaline and rely on your teammates to help the work get done. But yeah, it's a completely different type of stress than any other job that I've worked, which makes the end of the shift uniquely wonderful and gratifying in its own way. Yeah, I mentioned this at Pale Fire the other night. I have more stress dreams about restaurant work than any other job I've had. When I think about restaurant, I think about community, warmth, familiarity, the laughs, and I also think about how stressful it is when you're, trying to accomplish 10 things at once. But you just make your way through, and yeah, the things I dream about are utterly senseless, like hairs growing out of my mouth while I'm trying to tell the specials, and I catch a sidelong glimpse of the bowl of soup I just dropped, and there's definitely something swimming in it, but I think these barely even, in the dreams, they are alarming, but they rarely even register as absurd, because that is truly how absurd the rush feels at a busy restaurant when you're in the thick of it. Thank you.
Rebecca, I'm curious about why John Grisham? Why add him to the novel or put him in the novel? Or maybe John Grisham in the novel?
Yeah, so John Grisham actually came and dined at the Chop House here in Harrisonburg when I worked there. He came with a group from JMU, and nothing noteworthy happened at all. Everyone who interacted with him said he was just the loveliest gentleman. And as it happens, someone on my publishing team went to school at UVA, and she had encountered him. I think he came to a class that she was in, and she said he wore the most beautiful loafers she had ever seen. So I was like, the one detail I had to take from her. But yeah, I chose John Grisham because I had devised this structure for the book. I wanted it to be set over the course of one day, to have missing stakes, and I felt like I needed to, at a certain point, I felt like I needed to add some sort of tension, something to up the ante a little bit. And then I thought back, that John Grisham came to the Chop House, and since I was writing, a mystery of sorts, I thought, a writer of really intricately plotted mysteries or thrillers would be the right guest of honor. But yeah, he came actually quite late in the process, because I was working through the nuts and bolts of this mystery, and yeah, as I mentioned at dinner, I like to enter a book with defined edges, and my previous book, I'll Come to You, I decided from the outset I wanted it to be set over the course of a year, anchored by the anticipation and arrival of a child, told in monthly stories. So January opens with news of the pregnancy, and then and so forth. It moves through the baby's first holiday. So that's just to use another example of roughly how much information I want to have at the outset. But then there are many surprises along the way, and John Grisham was one of them. In this case.
I'm just curious, when you use a real person in a novel, and especially somebody very well known like John Grisham, do you have to ask permission? Do you have to say to him, is it okay if I use your name?
That's a good question. I chose the route of ask forgiveness, not permission, but no, with my publisher's approval. So my understanding is, if they are fictionalized, if it's clearly a novel and they're being used fictionally, and if the material is not derogatory, which it's not, and in the book, there's, not to give anything away, but there is some question as to whether he actually is the individual who dines there. So in this sort of scenario, there are enough loopholes, but yeah, generally speaking, if the portrayal is largely positive, and it has clearly been fictionalized, one does not need to ask permission. But I will ask for forgiveness if necessary.
When you do your books, do you ever start at the end? Do you ever have an ending in mind, or do you always work towards that? Do you ever have an ending in mind, or do you work towards that from the beginning?
I never know the ending. I like to have the time frame established and the setting established. But beyond that, yeah, the ending I usually arrive at really late. On average, I would say I usually start to understand the ending when I'm maybe about 3/4 of the way through the book, and then I really have to hurry to finish. Otherwise, it becomes really heavy-handed, and the writing, like the energy deflates. So I have to like scurry to the end. Yeah, I'm not an outliner at all. I like to discover along the way. That to me, that's the whole joy of writing is the discovery, the surprises, the mistakes that lead somewhere cool. So yeah, it's the kiss of death if I know too much too soon.
Rebecca, I'm curious about if Jane is the first Mennonite character you've had in any of your novels, and like how that came about.
Yeah, so Jane is the pastry chef, and she is a Mennonite. Gosh, I think she is the first Mennonite. Boy, I should know that for sure. She's definitely the first conservative Mennonite woman who would be dressed conservatively and in a workplace like this. Yeah, I think she is the first Mennonite that I've ever written. There are a couple like sort of juxtapositions in this book that sort of tickled me to think about, and one is Jane and the prep cook, who is a Guatemalan gentleman who works a second job, and they sort of develop a really precious friendship, and there's a lot of trust in between them, and yeah, I think that was sort of the. I quickly wanted to introduce a character who would feel a little bit out of step with the restaurant staff otherwise. Another thing that I did to kind of put unlikely folks together was the decision to set this in a college town in a small town. So you think about. For diners like the diners, for whom this place is just blowing their minds, they have no idea what to even make of anything that's on the menu and the prices and all of that. And on the other hand, in a small college town, you would have the parents of college students who might be visiting from big cities or affluent suburbs, coming to this small town where their kid's going to school, and they're like, this is not fine dining. They have no idea what to make of this place. So yeah, I always like to put together people where there's some conflicting values, sensibilities, expectations. So yeah, Jane sort of fit the bill for that in the context of the staff. Yeah. I think. Yeah.
Yeah, I was just wondering, when you started writing, did you set out to be a fiction novelist, or did you experiment with other genres before you settled?
Always fiction, only fiction. Yeah, I am not only incapable of writing nonfiction, I'm incapable, as I said, of writing fiction in the first person. It's funny, when you have a book coming out, that sometimes the publicity team for the publisher will say, is there anything relating to this novel that you could write an essay about? Because if they can get that published somewhere nice, then that's like extra PR for the book and extra attention. And early on, I would say, well, yeah, I can give this a shot. In my first couple books, I would like send my publicist, who I love, an essay after she, was like pulling teeth to get me to try. And I'd always be like, fine. And then I'd send it to her, and she'd be like, you know what? I'm just not gonna pass this around. Let's just hope the novel does well. The word gets out. I cannot write nonfiction. And I think I was just thinking aloud with Kevin at dinner about writing first person. I think there might be something in my psyche where I need to be absolutely as close to a character as possible. Like, proximity to character is what drives the voice always. I need to know what they fear, what they cannot say aloud, what makes them laugh, what they're proud of. I need to know so much. And yet, I have to acknowledge that I don't know everything, because this is what, I believe to be true in life, and largely is what drives me to the page as a reader and a writer, is the fundamental mystery of being a person and all of the things we don't know. The writer Richard Russo has a really wonderful quote. I think it's in relation to writing. He says, the unknown is what beckons us. And I absolutely feel that way as a reader and a writer. So I think perhaps there's something in my brain that, like, to switch to first person makes me feel like I need to know everything, and I know that I don't. There are always mysteries. So when I'm constructing characters, I'm doing two contradictory things, which are trying to provide information about the character, trying to provide as much as I can from that intimacy that I have with them, know them well enough to embarrass them, embarrass myself, yet also at the same time honor the mystery, honor what makes us mysterious, everything that we will never know about one another, that the world that exists in everyone.
Yeah, thank you.
Thank you.
We've still got a few more minutes.
Oh, thank you for that question. Aunt Orsa. I loved writing Aunt Orsa. She's just so horrific. she's so abrasive and quick to draw unfair assumptions, like downright cruel in some moments. But I just got such a bang out of her. It just felt like pure play. Yeah. To meet her and expose her.
Can I just read one great paragraph and just say what I thought was really great about it? This is Julia thinking about her mom. Julia, I think she's one of the hosts, is that right? Yeah. There were certain activities Julia's ER nurse mom had always warned Julia about. Biking without a helmet, playing with fire, jumping into a body of water without knowledge of its depth. Stuff that seems so obviously dangerous, so certain to end in injury that Julia wouldn't have done it anyway. Her mother had not offered explicit advice on dating, but Julia realized now, well, yes, she probably had, just always seemed so obvious that Julia hadn't bothered to take it seriously. I love that paragraph just because of the surprising turn from like all this like obviously dangerous stuff to her mother had never offered explicit advice on dating, as if like it's basically the same as jumping into like a shallow body of water without checking out how deep it is. But I thought there were just like a number of paragraphs that were like that, where they just start just simple, clear, and then just swerve into something really funny and insightful like that. So, yeah.
Thank you.
Yeah.
Thank you. Thank you. Yeah, I wanted to, the concept struck me as really funny from the start, the idea for the book. And I set out to write a funny book. So I'm pleased if it tickled you at some points. I think, despite my lifelong desire to be the funniest person in the room, I never am. I have never been. The jokes always arrive 2 hours too late, So in writing, I have time to like turn things over in my mind. And I did want to write a funny book, but in previous books, I have set out with like a a more, like a heavier sort of concept that has some sort of emotional weight and touchstone. And then I've found the humor as I get to know the Andor says in the books. But in this case, I wanted to write a book that was a total romp. And I hope it is funny, but I had the opposite experience of, as I encountered each character, and the grit and the gravity of their lives, it became a more emotional book at some moments than what I set out to write. In part, mostly I think because of the working class folks that they're struggling for transportation to and from work. They're paycheck to paycheck. Some of them have experienced trauma relating to childhood poverty, that sort of thing. So, things rarely come out as I expect.
Got time for one or two more questions?
Mm-hmm. Yeah, oh, that's such a good question. There are, since the perspective changes with every chapter, there are quite a few stories that are introduced in the backstories of some of these characters and their interactions that the reader never finds out what actually, comes to pass, since you're only with them for 24 hours. And yeah, I've been asked before if I envision a life for my characters beyond the book or their appearance in the book, and I really don't. I have such a complete experience with them in the context of a book. The pastry chef and the prep cook is an example of a friendship that may be going somewhere or may not. That's left unanswered, but to me that is the whole story. The characters are extremely alive to me while I'm writing them, and that is all that I know. That's all I know about is what's there.
Okay, I think that's a good place to end. Let's give Rebecca a hand.
Thank you so much, Kevin. Thank you all again for coming.
Thanks everyone for being here. Please buy a copy of the book if you don't have a copy yet, and Rebecca will be around to sign it, talk to you a little bit, and again, thanks for coming out tonight.